Okay, hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webinar, How to Build Efficiencies and Securities Through Forms Process Automation. My name is Kevin Hogan. I'm the editor-at-large for eSchool, and I'm excited to have you join us for what should be a very informative session. Today's event is brought to you by Adobe Sign. Adobe Sign helps schools go paperless, which revolutionizes the business of running an institution. Use Adobe Sign to create seamless workflows that are simple for staff and students to complete and can save your school both time and money. Reduce errors, increase security and compliance, and foster operational resiliency. From HR, finance, and procurement forms to student-facing forms like IEPs and device consent forms, paperless workflows powered by Adobe Sign create digital experiences in schools that make life a little easier for the entire campus community. Before we dive into our conversation here today, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the features of the platform that we're using for this webinar. Today's event will be recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing a thing. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with a PDF of the slides. You can submit questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on the Q&A box. There will be a time at the end of the presentation for our speakers to address those questions. We also have a chat function you can launch, but feel free to use this to contact someone from the eSchool News team if you have a technical question, but please don't use that to ask questions of our speakers. And I would encourage everyone listening this afternoon to add in ideas, add in questions. It adds to the insights and the best practices that everyone can share here today. Also, there's closed caption available by clicking on the closed caption tab. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with the conversation. And I'd like to do just a quick introduction of everyone here. We will start with Shad Magaha. Shad serves as the Chief Technology Officer for Wichita Falls ISD, which is located in North Central Texas. Their department's mission is to make learning visible and to publish for a worldwide audience. As the CTO, Shad is responsible for technology planning and resource management for all students and staff at the district's 26 campuses. Prior to working at Wichita, he worked at Burke-Burnett ISD for 11 years, where he served as a desktop technician, network administrator, and director of technology. In all, Shad has over 20 years of professional experience in K-12 education. Next, we have Matthew Joseph. Dr. Joseph has been a school and district leader in many capacities in public education in his 27 years in the field. Experiences such as Director of Curriculum and Instruction, Director of Digital Learning and Innovation, Elementary School Principal, Classroom Teacher, and District Professional Development Specialist have provided Matt incredible insights on how to best support teaching and learning, and led to nationally published articles and opportunities to speak at multiple state and national events, and including this one particular online event with us. So Matt, thanks for joining us. Last but not least, Chitra Mithra. Chitra is the Director of the Edu Institutions Marketing with Adobe. She has over 20 years strategic product marketing experience in the technology industry. She has held various leadership roles at Adobe, including product marketing for Photoshop, Creative Cloud, Acrobat, and Adobe Sign. She has experience in using data analysis, customer insights, and in-depth understanding of geographic nuances to help develop global customer growth and retention strategies. She currently leads the education institutions business at Adobe with the responsibility across creative and document cloud products. She is also a CPCC, co-active coach, and an ICF certified executive coach and mentor. So everyone, thanks for joining me today. I know we're all very busy, even in our pandemic lives, and this is an opportunity that I've been looking forward to now for a few weeks. So thanks everybody for joining us. I know one topic of conversation that we're all pretty much sick of talking about, which is the pandemic, but nevertheless, it is still very much a part of our everyday lives. And when we start off the conversation here today about the use of automating forms processing, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I really believe that out of some of the silver linings that we might be able to find during these past 2 years almost now of this this great beta test that we've been that has been underway for education institutions. That the back office processes have been transformed just as much as, say, when you look at the classroom strategies and that forced remote move to the remote learning that we did in the current hybrid setup of whatever we are now. Matt, maybe you can start us off and talk a little bit about where you saw this back office transformation, BP, before the pandemic versus now, which I call DP, which is during the pandemic, and hopefully very soon will be after the pandemic.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, and thanks Adobe for having this great opportunity. I think sometimes talking about topics like this, we don't really talk about much because we talk about essentially the end user, the students, and in the classroom. But being a district leader now for my 7th year now in 2 different districts, really having some efficiency processes behind the scenes to get students the curriculum they need, to get teachers professional development they need, happens in that, as you said, I wouldn't say back office, but I'd say maybe central office, so that we can make that happen. So a couple things that really come to mind for me is around contracts and bidding for solution providers, because one of the things that we used to do is a lot of mailings or having a fax and having to sign. But one of the things that, along with Adobe Sign and having the opportunity to do digital work, it creates an efficiency model for us in our roles to get curriculum and to get professional development to teachers. So what I mean by that, just today, for an example, I was working with a solution provider. They sent a contract and we needed to have a digital signature on it. From there, we sent it to our legal department where they also had to do that. From there, got sent back to the solution provider and back to us all in one day. And it was an efficiency system that was in place because we could have these digital signatures and allow for the solution provider, our legal system, because in the district I'm in now, we have 22,000 students and 37 schools. So it could sometimes be cumbersome to get these things done. But in one day, we are able to get it done because of the efficiencies. And on Monday, the solution provider will be doing learning walks with our math coaches because of the resources that we are able to put into place with some of the digital signatures, where before we'd have to, and I'm not saying that snail mail is a fax machine. I understand that it would come fairly quickly, but things don't look as professional. Things aren't necessarily did who signed it or not. And having to send it and fax it and move it around all the time, granted, it's still efficient, but not to the level that we are able to do today with some of the digital signatures and with using our cloud-based tools. So it really, and that was a real-time practice that happened today. In my last role, when we were purchasing curriculum, when we had, in my previous role as a director of curriculum instruction, we had additional students at home who needed curriculum. We couldn't necessarily get it to them, and during the real depths of the pandemic, people weren't delivering either. So we used all the digital opportunities we had to sign and then have it delivered right to student homes. And when it went to the student home, they used a digital signature pad to make it happen. So these tools are, although not talked about enough in our profession, they are creating efficiencies to get students the information and resources they need, and the teachers the training to help them become better teachers.
Yeah, and Chad, I know that your district has been progressive for many years in terms of kind of being on the forefront of using technologies and logistics and those sort of software platforms to help automate things. Did the pandemic help accelerate any things that maybe that you were hoping to be put in place years before?
It really did for us. I mean, for us, we dealt with more of digital equity, and by creating surveys and polls, pardon me, we were able to go out and ask, do they have online access, and then do they have devices? But just because they said they had a device, do they have a device for every kid in the class, every kid in the household? Those kind of things were just beneficial for us, like beyond compare, because we didn't have that information before, and so then we were able to go out and do those kind of things. And then also then we kind of use that and then to transform more into a paperless workflow, which was huge for us on so many different levels. From online enrollment to and registration to to helping with administration teams and those kind of things, with having paperless, being able to not have to spend hours looking for a paper they were able to search a whole lot faster with those forms, that kind of thing.
Right. Right. And just right, with Adobe being just a standard bearer here for so many years with the PDF format, I'll assume that you were able to track some new usages of your technologies once March 2020 came along and everyone needed to shut down and go remote.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a crazy time. We went on spring break and never came back. It was like the spring break that just kept on giving.
Yeah.
And,
Just not
for
the
us,
one anybody would sign up for.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, first
was
of all,
fun.
Kevin, thank you for moderating this session. And I'm super excited for this conversation with Matthew and Shad. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when we think about, let me start even with the example that Matthew gave, right? Like in terms of just the time and the cost savings of paper to digital, digital to paper, back and forth, from the amount of time it takes. It's kind of crazy how we sort of had taken a lot of things for granted because we said, oh, that's just the way it's done. And I think, to your point about the silver lining, I feel like a lot of processes, a lot of administrative workflows and processes that we had just taken for granted, suddenly this pandemic, the silver lining, it gave us a pause and said, wait, let me think about this. Maybe we can do it differently. Maybe we can do it better. And I think that's something that is not going to change, even to your point, post-pandemic or after pandemic AP. I don't think it's going to change at all. And I'll give you a simple example of like an IEP process, right? Like IEPs take multiple signatures. Multiple people have to sort of take it. And I myself, like, yes, I work at Adobe, but I'm also a parent. And so when I think of, IEPs for my kid, I remember the time many moons ago when I had to go from the doctor's office to the special needs office to the principal's office, and I had to take time off from work to walk this IEP form from one place to the other. And in the meantime, my child was not getting the instruction that they deserved because the IEP form was not in place. So this kind of thing is shocking, and we never questioned it. We just did it. But now I see schools having IEP forms that are automated, that are, completely digital, to Matthew's point. And I have friends who have children now whose IEP forms this year got signed in a day. And that is incredible. And that's the kind of power of digital workflows. And, it warms my heart when actually they used Adobe Sign to get their IEP done. And I'm like, yes, and where was all of this when my kid went to school? But coming to the topic of PDF, right? We've always been the vendor of choice and the leader in PDFs. I mean, we invented PDFs many years ago. And then when we made it open source, it was always the way in which people wanted to communicate or transform documents because it sort of preserved that nature of what was in print. But then often what would happen is you would print a PDF form, you would sign it, then you would scan it again and then fax it back. So people kind of kept moving sort of this paper to digital, digital to paper, and you don't have to do that anymore. And I think that power is what makes me so happy and so excited to be working on the portfolio that we have at Adobe.
Yeah. And so, Matt, I mean, these technologies, as Chitra mentioned, I mean, PDFs have been around for decades. So they've been around for a long time. Is this as much a question about human behavior as it is the technology, where we've all been kind of forced, such as we are right now, into Zoom asynchronous communications, but also kind of forced to begin to trust the idea of digital e-signatures and other forms processing that in the past maybe teachers and parents were skeptical?
No, one of the words I was thinking of when you were having the lead in and then you dropped it in there was around trust. It's that these documents that are getting signed have student information. They have personal information. They might have social security numbers. So individuals sometimes get very nervous signing something. It could have account numbers when we're purchasing, as I said in the beginning. So getting something through the fax, you're standing there waiting. So you're like, I'm going to fax it to you. Then you run over and you wait so nobody else grabs it. Or if it's a shared printer, there's a trust factor both in the actual hard copy of having to do something like that, but also in the digital tool that you're using. For a while, some of the digital signatures were just download this and we can use a digital signature. There wasn't a trusted company like Adobe that was putting together something that you felt was an industry leader that you could utilize for, as Chitra said, IEPs, or I've been saying with solution providers, or talking about working with curriculum or professional. There wasn't something that I had for, when I was a principal or even early in my years as a district leader, that I felt like, oh, I could trust this because I was doing things just free source from the web. And they're great for some things. But when we talk about student information, we talk about accounts, we want both the trust that the document that is going through is being sent accurately with the proper cloud tools, but also the digital signature piece is from a trusted company that when it's received, it's not just a line that's a digital line that's on there. It's a legit digital signature that looks authentic and professional as well.
Now, Shad,
sorry.
go ahead. Sure.
Go ahead, Kevin. It's like you said, it's so exciting to talk about this topic. So I'm going to probably have to practice not to jump in.
No, please do.
Yeah, no, but I think, Matthew, to your point about trust, right? Like a lot of times when we as marketers for Adobe Sign, like spend time with our customers, I feel like I spend equal amount of time talking about the sort of people process side of things as much as the actual sort of technology part of it. So from a process standpoint, like how do you help people change from the way they were doing things to the way they're doing things now, and also, the legality of of e-signatures. And I know there's a session coming up, later on in the month or later in the series on the legality and the trust of it. But it is such a critical thing. People are still afraid. And, I often have to even remind them that, oh, no, actually, it is legal. It is okay to have e-signatures. And don't worry, it's we manage personal information, PII, differently. To your point, you don't have to run to the printer because somebody else could grab it, because there's authentication. And it knows that only, Kevin, who needs to sign it, will be seeing it. So there are so many things that actually digital provides that probably was not even available when we lived in sort of that analog world.
Yeah. But Shad, I mean, we're also talking about public school and school districts, and you're talking about 26 different locations and the general public. Do you find any hesitations when it comes to the use of using e-signatures or digital documents? Or there's some folks who are still kind of saying, you know what, no, I want to get a notary public, or I want to just make this, a paper document. Talk a little bit about maybe some of the day-to-day challenges you find with making that transition.
Kevin, I mean, really and truly, if there's one thing about COVID, it was an agent for change. I mean, we all turned on a dime. And I think our parents kind of helped embrace that too. They went from going to a school and having to pick up forms and having to fill those things out to be able to do it digitally and really and truly, being able to do it on their device. It didn't have to be at a desk with a piece of paper in the office of the school. I mean, so those things, we had a few pushbacks every now and then, but for the most part, everybody embraced it. I mean, they knew that it was going to have to be a time of adaptation and a time of change. And, they were just happy that their kids were getting to go to school, even if it had to be from home. They were happy to have that interaction with the kids and with the teachers. And so, I think any other time in life, if we tried to make that big, a drastic change, I think there would have been a whole lot more pushback on that. But for overall, we actually got away, like I said, we had maybe a couple or a handful out of, 14,000 kids that gave a little pushback. But even after you talk to them and work through it, talk about how secure those things are, they all seemed to sign eventually. They didn't really have a problem with it after we sat down and talked to them about it.
Yeah, and Shad, you bring up the point of mobile devices, right? And interestingly, there was a question in the chat which actually asked about mobile, and it is very difficult to think of a school district where everybody has 100% connectivity and everybody has a device at home and every kid has a device. It's often that people are sharing devices, people are struggling with bandwidth. There are issues of people trying to, work on a mobile phone, trying to manage to download things. And people are sitting in Starbucks and McDonald's parking lots and getting connected to school sessions. And with all of that, one of the things we really work hard on the science side is from a administrator or the person who is actually sending this for e-signatures. Of course, that person needs to have access to the browser and to be able to set all the workflow up and the processes up. But from a signature standpoint, so if I, as a parent, or one of us as end users are signing the document, it can very easily be done on a mobile device. It does not need a computer or access to sort of sophisticated hardware. So that's, I think, making it a lot more easier for people who are on the move, on the go, to sign it. I was talking to an example where a set of bus drivers were having to sign waiver forms so they could actually bus these kids to the school district because it was, under COVID, everybody had to wear masks and what have you. And in the past, the bus drivers would have had to come into the school to sign these waiver forms. And now they didn't have to do that. They were all remote wherever they were. They got this email on their mobile device and everybody was able to just sign it and good to go. So just, so many examples, which are very unique to schools, very unique to touching students, but also, some of the examples that Matthew gave where it may not touch a parent or a student at all. It might just be vendor management. It might be, onboarding an employee. It might be internal processes. I mean, there's just, the idea is that it's a very flexible tool, and it depends on us on how we use it and where we deploy it, so it becomes relevant for the use case that we have.
So, and one of the things I wanted to share, and when we, in a different example that we haven't really talked about yet, but one of the largest, budget items in any school budget is its personnel. Anytime we talk about how many people work in a district, that is the capacity of the district for work. And as a former principal, the documents that I printed the most were teacher evaluations. And having the opportunity to give feedback was always, we had to print out the document, we had to sit face to face, we had to each sign, we had to, and it wasn't as efficient where if a teacher had an offsite meeting or a different opportunity where maybe they didn't want to sit in a room or had a third person, their mentor join us or a coach. We're able to now utilize this digital technology to both have online meetings, give constant feedback, and have these digital signatures ongoing, not just that big aha moment at the end, like, let me see my evaluation. Oh, I'm going to sign it. It's ongoing through the time. And when you're thinking about, I was a principal of a small school, it was only 500 students, and I still had to evaluate about 100 staff. And having these efficiency practices now, not only for the filing of it, so now we're using digital filing, it also gives an ongoing record, and having digital data allows for our educators to show growth over time. So I know we're talking about what I would think is static kind of signatures at this point. There's also living signatures where we're signing, when we do teacher evaluations, we have multiple signatures. We sit down and meet for goals, and we're going to digitally sign the goals. We do a minimum of 3 observations or up to 5 if you're in your first 3 years, and there's 5 more digital signatures. If you're a new staff member, we meet at the middle of the year and at the end of the year. Now we got 2 more. We're almost at 10 times we are meeting with our staff to ask for signatures, digital signatures. So I keep going back to the efficiency, because one of the things that we always say, if you ask any teacher, besides saying we'd love more money, because we all would, is we want more time. And the way that we get this is having these efficiencies, but not time for time's sake. Going back to my last answer, because the teacher evaluation is about trust too. You're building trust with your evaluator. You're building trust when you talk about your goals. having that trust to use a digital platform that is almost invisible, because that's what we really want. As great as it is to talk about the tool, we don't want the tool to be the focus of any meeting or any issue. That this happens, it's signed, it's legal, and we move forward.
Let's talk a little bit about implementation. Again, we have two pretty major districts here where you're talking about tens of thousands of students and thousands of faculty. Is this something that's an incremental implementation, or is this something that you found that is better to do all at once? Maybe talk about your past, Shad, a little bit there.
Yeah, I mean, so for us, I mean, typically any sort of, anything new we bring in, we may start as a pilot. We'll do a small section, and then, once we get all the kinks worked out, we just do a major rollout. But they always say about how it is to turn a big ship. You got to go slowly. But like I said, we were talking about COVID. I mean, then again, it's one of those, all those ships all turned all at once overnight. I mean, so yes, like I said, given any other time, it probably would have taken a little while to get that done. There'd been probably a lot of planning to go along with that, but we were all pretty adaptive, and it happened pretty quick for all of us, I think.
Yeah. And that's not uncommon, right? Like traditionally, we've seen people sort of pick one use case. It could be staff management, to Matthew's example of staff evaluations. It could also be, one example that I've heard, which is usually an interesting pilot, is volunteers. Like schools have a ton of volunteers and they all need to sign, and they all need to go through, a bunch of paper processes before they're able to come into the school and volunteer. That's kind of an easy one to sort of try as a test case to see how much efficiencies it drives, right? How much time an administrator is spending on some of those things. Another kind of really interesting one that we keep hearing from is, in general, sort of in this space of staff. So where a lot of people have to submit if they're going overtime. And if overtime needs to happen, and they need to get approvals to, work overtime in some situations, especially if they're working with special needs students and what have you. So that's another one where I've seen it's sort of places where these use cases are isolated, and they're good test cases to demonstrate that efficiency, to demonstrate that ROI, and to say, yep, this is actually helping my district save money, save time. And the teacher, instead of running through paperwork and chasing paperwork, is actually spending time with the kids, teaching them. And then it starts to grow. So we at Adobe, we sort of call it let's really demonstrate success in one, and then grow the use cases within a customer site. So that's, it's nice to hear Shad say that that's exactly the way they think about it, because it's pretty consistent with what we see as well.
Matt, does that jive with your experience as well?
Absolutely. And I think the more we can really have that happen, the more we can be efficient and kind of have these systems in place. So yeah, I could say the same things in a different district, but that really echoes the work we've been doing.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how these processes intertwine with other enterprise software services that you're using, say, an attendance program, or maybe some financial program, or e-commerce that have been put in place for various things. Is that difficult, easy, or are there challenges that are involved with that? I mean, is that something that happens, or do you find that the forms processing is kind of, it stands on its own?
I think yes to every one that you just said. It's both challenging, it's both adaptable, but at the end of the day, it's doable. And I think what happens when it's incorporated with other systems, and this goes to why having one system for all you think, that's a whole nother webinar, but a discussion about having the workflow talk to each other. However, what's happening is when there is an SIS system and maybe an IEP system that aren't the same, they have to adapt to each other and then to print one form. But what's happening is one of the new cloud systems, or the cloud systems who are adapting, know this is a need and know this is a direction that our profession is going into. And I have found, at least in the vendors, the solution providers that I've worked with, they've started to adapt their systems to allow other systems to integrate, because it's such a large, any SIS system or any large data source system, they're not going to want to lose you as a client, because with 22,000 students, or, I know Shad's is way up there too, that's a system that they want to stay partnered with you. So having the solution providers adapt has been something they've done. And then knowing the need for digital signatures, they're working that in now. And I don't know enough of the technical side to speak on it, but the technical side of that and the coding and the processing is starting to become much more efficient and speedy, because we need it. And the industry knows that we need it. And if anyone is too slow to adapt, they're going to be left out.
Now,
Hey,
Chitra, go ahead, Chad.
good. I was going to add to that. So we were talking about like the online forms and the SIS. The amount of impact on the environment that the digital forms have brought is, tremendous. I think in my district alone, a couple of years ago, if you were doing online registration or if you were doing parent consent forms, you might be, 20 or 30 pages at minimum per kid that, the parent would have to print off and then have to sign, and they have to take back to school. And then once they've done that, then, they have to go through all that data. Then they have to scan it all back again or re-enter it because it was on a piece of paper. So, just the time savings and the impact on the environment, I think, are huge.
Yeah.
In general.
Yeah. And Chitra, as you said, as a parent, so many years of my 3 kids going through, and I'm going through those forms. I'm like, no one's looking at this. No one's looking at this. No one's looking at this. It's going right into the circular file, right? But now, just in the past couple of years, as a parent, as a user, I feel like, wow, it is being logged appropriately, right? And then these forms can be found. Chitra, maybe talk a little bit about how those technologies have evolved over the year to enable those sort of things.
Yeah, I think, they brought up SIS systems, and I know there's a lot of players in that space, right? But I think to your point, when we talk about, consent or acceptance, there's multiple sort of levels, I think, of how you can get consent. So there's, for example, in many SIS forms are just a click through. So you just click, you're accepting, you're consenting, then done, you move on. And for certain things, there are signatures needed, right? In certain cases, there are additional authentication that is needed in some really, really high value documents, like, maybe not in the case of a school, but maybe in case of IEPs, probably, you may need additional authentication, like you may have, an OTP come in, or a government ID authentication. So really think about it almost like the spectrum of technologies that will support any sort of opportunity. And I think the idea is, again, from the level of, we call those like high value documents, right? Like there are some documents, to your point, like nobody's going to read them. Maybe somebody reads them, don't take that wrongly, but they're not documents that are, sort of super critical in terms of having to get digital signatures or, some level of authentication. So for those, there's the click to accept. And then again, the gradation of the high value documents, right? Like people would say, you need to come into the office to sign it. And now from a technology standpoint, we even have notarization online, which is pretty cool, where, you could never imagine that a notary needs to, have to come in and get all these, things authenticated. That's not needed anymore. You can do it via electronic means. And so that's sort of how the technology has evolved over the years. And I think about it as, when you think of a digital transformation, right, it's a journey for all institutions, whether it's a K-12 school or even a commercial organization. It's a journey. Everybody starts to the point of, oh, I have to go to the principal's office and pick up this piece of paper and fill it up and go back and sign it. That's like very, very, very early. They're probably not on the journey at all. And then the next stage of the journey could just be like, oh, I'm actually just going to email PDFs to everybody, because I'm not going to print anything. So I'm going to save paper, but I'm still going to email it to somebody who then has to print it at their house, and then sign it and then scan it and send it back. So you're still not completely paperless. You're still sort of switching from paper to digital. Then you sort of get into the SIS systems and places where things are mostly staying in the realm of digital. It's click to accept, and it's fairly straightforward. And sort of the last sort of stage of digital transformation is where you're thinking about a process digitally from the very get-go. So Matthew's example of, teacher evaluations, what if you never started the conversation about the evaluation on paper? What if everything started off with the teacher even entering their name and their ID and email address on a digital form, and everything kind of flew, like the workflow kind of happens step by step, completely digitally from the get-go. And for us, those are the stages of digital transformation. And every school district and every institution I work with is somewhere in that spectrum, right? And our goal is to continue to sort of guide them through the path of digital transformation with not only technology, but also process evaluations, and helping them understand what it takes to move it. And there's a lot of resistance sometimes, but there's also a lot of, there always, what I've seen is in most districts, there are champions for things like this. So, somebody like Shad or Matthew might be champions because they understand the value, they understand what it means to drive efficiencies, what it takes to have ROI, and then they have to bring, in a way, their organization along, because there are a lot of people who would be just perfectly okay with, oh, it's too difficult to change, or I can't learn something new. And we need champions like, leaders we have here to help guide the organization down. And once they go down the path, even the naysayers love it. They're like, wow, this is amazing. Why was I resisting it? And they love it. And then they become advocates for this digital way of working.
Right.
And go ahead. And then I had another thought process, but go ahead, Kevin.
No, after you, Matt.
So one of the other things we haven't talked about today, not to keep bringing in different pieces here, but I want to really let the participants and attendees know, or those watching it after, that it's not just structural and it's not just the adults. We have a large population of students who are going to be signing documents. We have a large population of our faculty who will be writing recommendations that'll be sent to colleges. Part of our role in school is to get students to graduate and go on to either a profession or a college. And part of that, there is documentation transfer at that point, where we are having students, for any of you who have students who are either gone to college in the last few years or attending very soon, there's a common app, there's digital signatures on everything that you use. And when guidance counselors are asked, or teachers are asked to write recommendation, the day of printing them out and signing them and putting them in an envelope, it just isn't there anymore. So having these efficiencies, and as for our parents out there who are sending their kids off to four-year university, possibly away from you, you want to make sure that those signatures are there, that they get into where they need, that they get the housing that they need, the FAFSA is filled out. Our students are signing these agreements. Our athletes are signing letters of acceptance to play or perform for our performers. So it's not only the adults in our district that we're really trying to ensure this trust and this efficiency. Our students are becoming young adults, and to ensure that when they are transitioning from young adults to adults and college students, that we're using the same systems that they're going to see in college. Because I'm doing some work with colleges and supporting, they're using digital platforms, they're using digital tools to collect all the work. Transcripts are all digital now. This is the world and it has nothing to do with the pandemic. Yes, we've talked a little bit about the pandemic and the need for physical distancing, but now we're kind of at that point where, we're not past it by any means. Please don't think I say that, but we're in a position now that we are looking forward. And having that, our current seniors are filling out, well, hopefully, I think November 1st is the deadline, so they filled it out, and they are either accepting letters or they're having scholarships. So having our students put their name on it as minors, we have to have a trusted system in place for digital signage and follow through that protects their identity, but also gets them and gets their information to the place it needs to be.
And to be clear, what we're talking about is really the creation of a new infrastructure. It's not like we're going to go back to the way we were BP, right? I mean, or are there any things where you can see that maybe things are returning to normal more quickly, where people might start to agitate again for the paper-based forms for any of this? Or are we kind of like, cross the Rubicon when it comes to that?
I mean, the way I think about it is, the move towards digital experiences was already happening, right? This is even before the pandemic. And, I totally agree with Matt. I mean, we're definitely still in the middle of it, and by no means am I indicating that we're over it. But the point of that being the primary driver, that happened in March, April, May of last year, where, God, if you don't do this, you're not able to train the kids. They're not able to go to school. The teachers need help. But, we're like a year in. A lot of those things have sort of fallen into a steady state of management and functioning. But the impetus to go digital, the push toward digital experiences is not new. And it's not because of the pandemic. I mean, when we think of ourselves in our lives as whether it's a student, a kid, or an adult, a parent, it really doesn't matter. I mean, the days of us going to, Amazon.com and buying things is not new. Going to, Zappos for shoes is not new. Like, those are the kind of things that have not been because of the pandemic. And I think that's where education sort of got a little nudge or a push, or however you want to call it, where the pandemic kind of forced education and us to go down the path a little faster. But I think that push, it was a silver lining to the conversation we started off having. And as much as we know that education or learning happens better when the kids are sitting in front of a teacher, let's not have the teachers spend more time filling paperwork, right? Let them actually teach the kids. And then let's make all of the other things, processes, the paperwork, the administrative aspect of it, smooth and more digital. I mean, even students, to Matthew's point, if they're signing up for college, or if they're going to an athletic waiver form to use the gym, they can sign that waiver form online. Yes, the gym experience would still have to be in person and live, and that's the best beauty of it, to go and actually swim in the swimming pool. That can be virtual, but they don't have to fill up the paperwork when they go there, right? They don't have to take care of that on the day of. They can take care of that at home and get it done on a mobile device, and then they're there and they experience the real life college or student experience to the fullest.
Yeah. Hey, a question came in from the audience here. Interested to hear how, Boshad, you use the forms processing for families in regards to enrollment. Is there any mobile experiences that are involved with that, as well as a question about ELL? So I know in Texas that might be something that's important to you as well. And Matt, I want to get your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, so I mean, really and truly, I mean, we have all those forms we set up digitally. We tested them on mobile devices. We tested them on tablets. We tested on desktop computers. All of those things, they seem to work flawlessly. I did think of one more question when Matthew was talking a while ago, or one more thing to add to it. I was thinking about like improved safety. I mean, think about if you had all of those medical release forms for athletes, if coaches had those at their fingertips, to where that if they're at practice, whether it be swim practice, football practice, soccer practice, whatever, a student gets hurt, they have the ability to search right there and have all that information in their hand, up to date, current. So I just thought, that just improving on that efficiency would be huge. But yeah, so I mean, for us, the mobile part of it worked great. And we just had to make sure that, you have all the formatting set right and all of those things, but we had no issues whatsoever with any of that.
How about you, Matt? Just in terms of from the enrollment side of things.
So no, and I'm going to bring in one of the things that we talked about, or Charo talked about. Like, this was a time for them to see, almost like forcing them to use it. Another thing that really within that, and the example I'm going to give it, not necessarily forcing them to use it, forcing them to see that it works. And one of the things I've done a lot with professional development, and teachers would be like, oh, I'll believe it when I see it. Oh, we don't have time for that. Or we don't. Now the pandemic created that time and the urgency that they had to try and to see that this digital signature process works. So the example I'm giving is, yes, we had a digital opportunity for families to register. We had a lab in our registrar's office, and we had the digital forms that they could use. Pre-pandemic, it was people still came in, used the computer lab that was in the office to do the digital registration. And I'm not trying to make it like funny or making fun of people, but that was where they could do it in their house.
Yeah.
But then they couldn't answer questions. They felt more comfortable actually going to the office and using probably a more outdated computer in there and use the materials and the computer and
It's
asking
that fear, right, Matt?
Well,
It's that
it's-
inherent fear.
Yeah, so this last 2 years has really allowed families who are registering to utilize, because they didn't have a choice. And now that there's that same option where you can come in with a mask or stay home and do it, families are now, it's flipped, where it was 80% were still coming in and filling it out in the computer in the lab. Now it's 80% filling out from home, because it was the trust in the process that you didn't need to just sit and do it in front of somebody, that having that opportunity, because there was no difference in experience besides you're in a different location near somebody who could help you.
Mhm.
And having, and when that happens, and the reason I bring this up is, and in the district I work in before here, we had 47% as multi-language learners. And so we had a high level of L students, is that what we learned is there wasn't a help session. We didn't have the technology where if someone was at home, that they could chat in, or that we had an on-call Zoom. So we also adapted that if we create these efficiencies at home with forms and putting everything online and having digital signatures, we still have to do the human service side of this, giving families the opportunity to check in. So creating these systems, it's really about the human element, because the issue wasn't necessarily the form, the technology. The issue was, as you said, the fear of I can't do this or can't fill it out. And having these opportunities for the forms, having the digital signatures, once you're comfortable, it's just real smooth. And over time, because a lot of the families in our districts had multiple children, the second time through, it was even more efficient.
I can vouch for that, as just going through the FOSSs last week with a second child going through, and you just, be able to, add in click this button, add in the information, and then click this button and get your taxes from the IRS. And I was like, wow, I just, that was about 5 hours less time than it took the first time that you did it, right? So those things are all in place. Let's talk about the cost aspect of all of this. I know, again, BP, I believe both Shad and Matt, we would be on panels where we'd be talking about how these will add cost efficiencies to school boards when you just talk about the cost of paper. Maybe that argument doesn't even need to be had anymore, but talk a little bit about how it affects your district budgets when these systems get up and running. And do either of you still have a van that drives forms from one school building to another?
Just the
No
interoffice
longer,
mail.
man.
All gone?
Yep. I think another cost savings you got to take into consideration too is ink, toner.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, those are things that nobody thinks about really when you're talking about going digitally and doing online forms and doing, online signatures and all that. But I mean, the cost savings for ink and paper both, I mean, just huge.
Yeah. Kevin, I think cost savings, it's very easy to kind of measure the cost savings of actual things, right? Which is paper, ink, van, the gas for the van, the dry, like whatever those material things are. I think one of the hidden benefits, efficiencies, however you want to call it, cost savings, is the time. And that is not often talked about, but I think, just if you take the time it takes, we were talking about how much time maybe it takes, like 20 or 25 minutes or a certain percentage of an administrator's time that suddenly is freed up to do more. and to do different things. And from an administrator standpoint, there's efficiencies there. But from a teacher standpoint, anybody that's sort of interacting with the students, there is the opportunity to teach, to focus on sort of learning outcomes versus actually focusing on sort of the back office administrative paperwork side of things. And that's not often measured. And one of the things we want to be doing is sort of looking for ways in which we quantify that and demonstrate that value to schools so they can actually see, yes, it is a additional line item in the budget or in terms of IT dollars, but here's all the ways in which they're saving, which doesn't sort of actually showcase, like easily show up, you know. It's funny, the other thing that people often call out, and this is something schools have called out to me, is the cost of a stamp to actually mail some of these things, which is sort of interesting. And again, those are the more tangible things and easy to measure.
Yeah,
So another thing, can I just jump in with costs for a little bit?
sure.
So one of the things that gets misconstrued with cost in budget, and I've had to present budgets in front of school committees in two different roles, is that we often think of costs in the initial cost. So granted, getting these systems up and running might be 60% of your budget. And I don't know, I'm just making up numbers, but buying ink, buying some paper, it's going to be like 2%. People do that for what we might need later. But what happens is, and being in a school where we would go through our paper supply by March and then have to rebuy paper, it tends to end up costing more. That just because it's a large chunk, and it is not cheap to get up and running. I'm not trying to say, oh, we're going to save all this money by putting these. It takes money, but what you have to look at is the percentage of your budget. How much of that percentage do you use, but actually save over schools 10 months for the most part, and sometimes 12 if you're working in central office. That over a year, we still used 100% of our budget. We might have just used 40% in July to get this up and running. And then the rest of the year use 60%. And I think having somebody explain it to the school board or to a community, just because you spend a large amount of your budget line item on some of these efficiency tools, that doesn't mean it's a waste of money or you're going to run out. That yes, it's going to be, you get what you pay for. And when you pay for a high level product and it lasts and it's safe and it's trustworthy, now you're not talking about cost, you're talking about value. And when you're talking about how valuable something is to students, we've talked just in 52 minutes, students, staff, families, colleges, solution providers, these are all things that have a human element to them that you're going to have some trust, but they're also something you don't want to replace every year. So invest in this, because the other thing with cost and value, so let's say you invest and you bring on Adobe Sign and it's incredibly efficient. It will grow with you. You don't have to replace it. If there's something that comes up and there's a need, work with the solution provider, say, oh, we can just add a form. Adding a form could be, $1,000 load, which, people get paid to work. We got to do that. But adding a whole new system could be $40,000.
Right.
So partnering with a company that's trustworthy and has a vision of growth is very important too.
So we had another question come in from the audience, someone who works in the food services side of the school district. A diet prescription form is required to feed a student a special meal, and it has to be signed by the parent and a doctor. Would digitally signing something like this form interfere with doctor-patient privacy laws? Can we talk about some of those aspects of it where you're getting a wider community involved in the process? Chitra, maybe we'll ask you that question.
I was going to say, being somebody who's run a building, and there's been a lot of discussions with the nurse and with families. So the doctor-patient confidentiality is true, but for students who have to see the nurse, who have a diagnosis, both the nurse and the doctor sign this. And anytime we've had a specialized meal, this was done through the proper processes to a point that I didn't even know who that was. And then what happens is our nurse or the head nurse in the district, however your system sets it up, they sign that up following the guidelines. and they sign it, just like you would if you were sending your child to the pediatrician or whatever yourself. And then the nurse works with the food service director. And there's a system, and I don't know what it is, but let's just say this is why we also have a digital system, because the students now all have badges, right? So in the information system, Matt Joseph needs a special, dietary piece. They go through, they buzz in with their badge. The person on the other end sees, however it's coded, it could or a little something. They see this, and only those individuals know, and then they get their lunch, and the day just moves forward, and work on that. So those systems are in place, and that's something that we really work hard on as building administrators to ensure that confidentiality.
Right. Chad, same experience?
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, yeah.
So I knew the most difficult part of my job this afternoon would be to end the conversation. There's so many insights and ideas, and the topic is one that is so quickly moving and advancing. But as we're getting to the end here, maybe I ask each of you to give us a little bit of a kind of a crystal ball of where you see your current implementations in 3 years. Anything on your wish list, maybe that you want to give to Chitra for Adobe, or any sort of things that maybe you hope will become more entrenched as we go into after the pandemic here. And Chad, I'll put you on the hot seat first.
I would say, I mean, just the continued support that Adobe and companies like them have given to do like what Matthew was saying earlier about being able to integrate in with all form factors of whatever we're using. I think that's essential. I think it's one of those things that post-pandemic or post, whatever. I think that one of those it has to be like, it's essential that it needs to stay around. I don't think it'll ever go away. I think that's been huge. Other than that, I mean, it's always been a pleasure to work with them and to do anything around Adobe. And like they said, it's huge in K-12. So I really couldn't ask for anything really other than that.
Yeah. Matt, how about you? Oh, we caught you on the mute, Matt.
Ruth put in a question in, and it's just another great example. Work permits where students have to go in and sign. That would definitely be appropriate. So I wanted to sneak that in before, because she added that question as well. I think for me, one of the things that I have seen evolving is digital signatures have gone from check here to sign. I mean, come on, like as great as sometimes I'm like, yeah, check, move on. It's not something you want your kids or your evaluation to be on there, or sign here and you just go squiggable. And
Yeah.
what I'm seeing the evolution of digital signatures, it's my actual signature. It's authentic. And my wish list is to continue to update the technology that your digital signature is not just where you run your hand over the touch screen. It's
Right.
your actual signature. You can import it. It's authentic. My signature always has my full first name, middle initial, and last name. That's my authentic signature. And as the technology adapts, and I'm putting my name on I'm not saying I'm super important. I'm saying they're going on documents that are purchasing important things and are recommending certain things. I really like the fact that the technology is evolving. That's the actual signature, just in a digital format.
Yeah. And Chitra, let's leave you with the last word here.
Yeah, no, I think that, Matthew is sort of saying a lot of things, and Shad has sort of been a great partner here in this webinar. And I'm super excited because, it's great when everybody here is actually so aligned in terms of the opportunity and the sort of vision for where digital transformation can take a school district or an education institution. And to Matt's point, authentication, high value documents, like those are the ways in which we can really make it real. I mean, we don't want somebody to be tampering with our document once I've signed it. That's the whole point of authentic signatures and locking it down. And the technology is continuing to evolve and become more and more stronger with multiple layers of ensuring that authentic signatures are accepted. And there's also a big move towards making them more acceptable within various industries, various types of documents, and so on. And for me, as somebody that works in the technology industry, it's so gratifying to work on the education segment, because I feel like we're actually making a difference in people's lives and making things easier for the future generation. So I'm very excited about where education will go with digital transformation in the next few years.
Well, that's great. And I see that our time is just about up, so I'm going to wrap it up. If you submitted a question that we didn't get to in the Q&A portion, someone from Adobe will follow up with you directly. Once again, I'd like to thank our presenters today for a very informative presentation. And I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well and for their questions. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. Thanks again for participating and have a great day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.